Jeanette Lewis. I'm the incumbent here at St. Barnabas for the Anglican congregation, and Anita has disappeared. But you'll see her walking around. She's the pastor for the Lutheran congregation that's met here in our building for over 60 years. And we're now doing things together, one of which is It Is Well With My Soul, which this is falling under. We're doing concerts and mental health and wellness forums. This is our first one, so we thank you for coming and enjoying this. I need to warn you that we are filming this, so it will be up on our website in a while, so don't expect it up tomorrow. But you know, in a few weeks, check it out and you'll see it there if you want to refer it to anybody. We also have lots of stuff to munch on and coffee and tea. We also have a lot of brochures from organizations around mental health and wellness, so please help yourself to those. For those of you who aren't familiar with St. Barnabas, if you go through the door at the back, there are 2 washrooms, one directly opposite the door, and then if you go down the ramp or the 3 stairs, there's a handicapped washroom right there as well. I'd ask if you please return your cell phones to silent if you have any with you, just so that it doesn't interfere with what we're doing here. And I'd like to introduce Elise, who is going to be our moderator for today. She's a French teacher and head of languages at Bishop Strachan School in Toronto. She has a PhD in English language and literature from, I'm going to say this wrong, University Saint-Étienne. I'm not good at French, so in France. She's also taught at Middlebury College at the Oakland campus, and she has published pure articles as well as fiction and poetry in Australia, France, and Canada. So she's going to be our moderator, and make sure we're done. We will definitely be finished at 1:30, and then there's the panelists have agreed to stick around, and if you have any questions or would like to talk to them, that's your opportunity then to do that, okay? And because we're a church, we're just going to start with a short prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for the gifts you've given us. Please help us to always be conscious of what we say and do and how it affects others. We pray that we will always listen with our hearts as well as our ears and talk less with our mouths. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Hello, and thank you for being here. Can everyone hear me? I will start by introducing our 4 panelists who have kindly agreed to be here with us and share the wealth of knowledge and understanding that they have built over the years. Dr. Guy Bussel, who is this gentleman over here, is a chiropractor. He holds a bachelor from the University of Toronto and a master's from Bridgeport University. And he has been a chiropractor since 1979. He defines his calling as about being there for a fellow human being. And he believes in the power of community, and we definitely thank him for contributing to this community today. Lauma Stiglitz holds a bachelor in psychology from York University, a bachelor of education from U of T, a certificate in long-term care administration from Ryerson University, and a certificate in alternative dispute resolution from York University. Lauma is the executive director at Christus Doors, Latvian Home, and her volunteer work includes facilitation and mediation. Benjamin Bandos is a PhD candidate and a Vanier Scholar at the University of Toronto's Centre for Comparative Literature. Since 2015, he has worked with various consumer, survivor, ex-patient, and mental health communities and organizations, including Mad Pride Toronto, MadX, and Recovery Network Toronto. He has recently been collaborating with Hearing Voices support worker, Kevin Healy, and he's the co-founder of the Guattari Research Group Toronto. Matthew Dewar, did I pronounce your name correctly? Okay. Is a mental health specialized community development officer with the City of Toronto's Communities Crisis Response Program. He holds a bachelor in criminology and a bachelor of social work from Lakehead University and a master's of social work from the University of Toronto. Matthew is also a board member for the Stopgap Foundation. So thank you all for being here today. Before we start, let me also introduce my co-moderator, who is sitting in the audience over here, Kaspars Reynes. Kaspars is a PhD student and a Connaught Scholar at the University of Toronto's Centre for Comparative Literature. He's an active member and organizer in the Toronto Latvian community. So Kaspars will help us with timekeeping today, and he will be letting each participant know when time is running up. We will be asking 3 questions today to each of our panelists, 2 of which will be answered individually, and we will be offering 3 minutes to each panelist to offer their thought and response. And the last question will be given to you as a conversation piece. So we're hoping to keep the remainder of the time to have the last question offered as a conversation for you to debate and exchange on. Audience, you are not silenced, even though we do not have time to take your questions today formally with the panel. We are offering you Post-it notes over here on the little table, along with pens, and we ask that you please record your thoughts and or questions. We ask 1 per Post-it note, and that you just put the little sticky note on the wall right here. This will serve as a piece to further the conversation, either during our coffee here post-forum, but also for us to pick up and read your thoughts and inform the direction of our next forum. Finally, I'd like to mention that Reverend Grace Caldwell, the deacon of St. Barnabas, will be acting in a support capacity after the forum. Reverend Caldwell has recently retired as an addictions counselor. Are you ready? Very well. So the first question that I'd like to offer to Dr. Geibicells is, what is mental health?
Mental health is one aspect of our experience in life, our physical health, our spiritual health, our mental health, all reside in this little framework I have, limited by my skin, in my own case, so I can speak on my own behalf. But it has something to do with balance, something to do with communication, something to do with being recognized by people around you, something to do with being tolerant and accepting. So when one's mental health is better, then we can tolerate and accept a lot. When it's poor, then we exhibit a lot of psychopathic behavior. So when you've got someone who's looking like a psychopath, ask yourself, what kind of pressures are on them, and what can you do to change them? So that's the way I see mental health, is that it's a dynamic. That's all I'm saying.
Sure, yeah, I see mental health as something that's fluid and on a continuum, not necessarily like you have it or you don't. Because I think all of you can agree, sometimes we have better days, we're feeling really good, and maybe the next day we're feeling sadder or we're not feeling as good. So I think it is fluid and it's on a continuum, and many things impact how we're feeling or how we're doing mentally. We could have like biological factors impacting that, we could have environmental factors impacting that, and our various life experiences impact how we see the world and how we feel about like ourselves and others. So I would say mental health, yeah, is a continuum, and it is something that can be worked through, and that everyone has it. Like I think there's a number of different stats that say about 1 in 5 Canadians experience mental health in their life or currently, which I think is still like underrepresented, because a lot of people probably aren't coming forward to say I have mental health. But as we get older, that stat almost increases. So by the time we hit about 40 years old, that's like 1 in 2 Canadians have experienced some sort of mental health issue in their lives. So it's something that's very, very common, but something that's not really talked about a ton.
So if you look up the definition for mental health on any search engine, you'll get a pretty basic definition of an absence of mental illnesses, emotional disturbances, and the like. So if we use this very basic and simple definition, we realize that this mental health has almost no resistance threshold. The very moment you start feeling strange, you start feeling something you've never felt before, or have a very intense experience and don't know how to react to it, we will almost immediately think there is something wrong with us, and that there is potentially a disease that's affecting us, and so on and so forth. So in this very basic definition, we kind of buy into the idea of, well, it's kind of an idea that has been perpetuated by a very long and arduous tradition of the medical system, which is I am healthy or I am ill. But if we reduce the complexity of our everyday mental life to just I'm ill or I'm well, we reduce all that's affecting us. So from family issues to social issues, economic pressures, housing issues, political and so on and so forth, that it's all these things compound upon the individual self. So when I think of mental health in this sort of definition, I think it's much more, because the threshold is non-existent and it's based on this absence of problems, then I think it's not the best to talk about in terms of mental health, but just human experience as such. And that way, it becomes a much more open idea and something people would like to talk about.
So mental health is a mix of healthy, emotional, psychological, social skills. And it's important to stress that it's not just an absence of an illness, as just was mentioned. It's more of a resilience, a coping mechanism, being able to deal with the ups and downs in life. And when it gets out of balance, that's when the illness comes in. Now, my field of expertise is long-term care, and within long-term care, it has been said there's about 80 to 90% of residents have mental illness, and that would sort of indicate there's no mental health there. But it goes up and down. But we have to remember that the mental health is not synonymous with aging. Normal aging does not mean that there is mental illness expected. It just gets hidden. It gets, often it's just accepted. Oh, I'm just getting older, that's why I have memory loss. And that's important to understand what mental health and aging is. The other thing is people, as seniors are in the community and they're often alone or they have lost their social circle, all those variables that help maintain a healthy lifestyle, a healthy mental health. That's important. We find seniors in the community become toast and tea noshers. They don't have good nutrition. They won't get outside. All of those things that work to keep a person healthy, whether they're 15 or they're 85 or 95 or 105. And of course, there is the mental illness aspect of it. Dementia is becoming very prevalent. And it's important to know that as seniors have mental illness, and there are caregivers. The caregivers then are under extreme stress. How is their mental health? Are they under incredible stress and difficult? And again, for me, it's the staff as well. They face angry residents. They face dementia that also presents in aggression. So we have to really maintain and be aware of their mental health and their ability to cope and their resilience.
May I ask one question actually to Dr. Davis? How does mental health show up in your practice? You're a chiropractor and you deal with the body, so I'm curious, since we have a little time left on the topic, and we're talking about defining mental health, how do you see mental health in your practice?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Elise, because I was gifted to attend a presentation from the president of the United Kingdom Holistic Medical Association. He was on tour in North America and spoke to us. He said, people coming to your office don't always have what it seems they have. Underlying whatever their physical complaint is usually an emotional or a mental or a spiritual issue. And if you don't ask about their family, don't ask about their relationships, then you're going to miss the reason they came to see you. And you can treat the effects all the time. But you need to get a little bit deeper and you need to get your hands dirty if you wish. Put it that way, but that's actually exciting because I've had the pleasure of interviewing thousands of people, maybe about 10,000 people in practice now, 40 years. And everyone has their own story, everyone has their own experience, and everyone has got something that all of a sudden you hit oh, that's sensitive for them. And you go a bit deeper, gently of course, and next thing you know, they're talking about whatever was the problem, and you don't even solve the problem. You just be there for them. And that's what I've been so fortunate to do. But that also paralleled my own change, because I did a lot of personal work in 20 years. So, anyhow, that's my experience.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Well, that's a perfect segue into the second question. How do we talk about mental health?
If I was to answer that directly, I would say that I don't think I'd ever approach it as head-on with somebody. I practiced in Queen Street, Parkdale area for 13 years. And the mental health center used to be called 999 Queen Street when I was a youngster. And I was fortunate to be invited to sit on the community board there, Archway. And that's kind of like a halfway house for people that have been discharged from the mental health center and then are being reintegrated into the community. But the community did not like hundreds of people that were walk down the street shouting and declaiming and gesticulating, and our community was really in a lot of turmoil. So I would never approach somebody face on with mental health and just say, you've got a problem. I'd say something like, how are you? What are you doing? You know, I get to know that person. And it only happens one person at a time, person to person. And me individually, I did that, but I encouraged my people coming to see me in practice to talk to each other. That was to create community wherever you are. Just, I think it was the way I tackle mental health. Oh, besides studying, psychotherapy for 3 years and doing personal therapy for a lot of years.
Yeah, I think like talking about like how to talk about mental health. Like I was kind of saying earlier, I feel like sometimes there's a lot of stigma around it, and I think in a lot of the times we don't want to talk about it because what is it? How does that reflect on me? Or maybe there's some like you feel ashamed of what are people going to think of me if I share this piece of me? Because I think through history, various cultures even in talking about mental health, sometimes there's not even language. What is mental health? Kind of the first question, right? There's no language for it, or mental health, it's you're crazy, quote unquote. And in some places that's you get locked up and thrown in jail. So we're not going to talk about that. So I think it's important here in this context to kind of, when talking about it, it's more of a thing that we're all going through. It's really the result of us in our life experiences and what we've gone through has made us who we are today. It impacts the way that we see the world, how we interact with people. And so for me, talking about mental health and how do we talk about it, for me it's all relationships. You all know like your family or friends really well. If you see changes in them, acting differently, you know, I don't know. I know when my mom's upset, for example. You can see those changes in people, and so you can kind of just gently approach it with them. Hey, how's it going? Checking in with them. I'm seeing you're like a bit more angry lately. Is everything okay? It doesn't have to be mental health so scary or so big. I think it can be easier conversations and really just that kind of human piece that you were mentioning of how do you just relate to each other as people and be there for each other. Because one of the pieces or like phrases I always use is healing comes in connection with others, because you can try and do work by yourself, but a lot of the time we don't get very far or feel lonely or isolated in how we're feeling. But the second you're kind of reaching out and connecting with people, you might have something in common and be, oh, well actually I'm feeling the same way. Oh, it's actually good. Oh, there's 3 of us that feel the same way. I'm actually not alone in this, and it's a common experience then. One of the pieces, so as I said, I'm with the city, and so the Danforth happened a year ago, that incident, and we had a whole event that happened down in the park this year, and even that was a time for people that were feeling really heavy and impacted by that event to kind of come together and say, actually, we're here together and we're in it. I'm not alone in these feelings. And so for me, again, it's that relationship piece and how do we come together and be humans in the conversation of how are we feeling and connecting with one another.
Can I ask before we move on just a question? Do you think we're any closer to developing an effective language around mental health?
An effective language around mental health. Well, I think this is the piece that's tricky, is I think in mental health there's a lot of big words, and it's years of school, and it looks very intimidating. And so how do we translate that to day-to-day living? Where maybe it's like, I can't, that's too scary, to, okay, I kind of understand. And I think it's through kind of conversations like this that we can kind of come to that common understanding where we translate that research, higher level stuff to day-to-day, and how does that impact, and how do I use that in my life?
In a very similar vein, as we were mentioning, very big, scary words, diagnostic language, and so on. And there's a lot of really interesting work on this by Dr. Marius Rom, a Danish social psychiatrist, who actually, with his patient and his clinical practice more in general, showed that if you are experiencing something you're not sure to define, but if you go and get a definition or a label of a diagnosis, that in itself can lead to the actual illness that you will develop as you keep going back into the medical system and so on and so forth. So it becomes a kind of a self-fulfilling prophecy that I have this problem and therefore it's going to only get worse if I don't treat it in a very certain way. So, and as Matt was saying, we need to find a language that we can address this sort of distress, different types of crises in our lives, because it's tough to talk about these things, but there is a language we can learn to create with one another using just very simple descriptions or very detailed description of how a certain person is feeling. And I mean, because we are in this context, I mean, there is a spiritual language to talk about this as well. And it's ways that we can learn to share and learn from one another's perspectives and experiences. And from that, we can develop a sense of community, a kind of empathy, empathetic witnessing of one another's experiences. And this you can say, retains the respect for an individual and their dignity, and also teaches us how to help and to share ourselves. So that's how I think we can learn to develop a different sort of language to talk about very human experiences that we can't quite understand right away.
I think before you can talk about mental health with anybody, you really have to develop a relationship and trust. And you have to be able to listen and hear. Having said that, there's always room for talking about what mental health is so that people can understand what a healthy lifestyle, healthy feeling would be. And it's really important in my workplace, it's very important for us to get feedback to know what the healthy person did look like if they come to us at a point when they have an illness at this point. I think it's important to name it, but only after the relationship and trust is there. I think there is this, even if the person doesn't accept it, there is that moment of reflection that they might go home and then say, maybe. And then, after you name it, I think it's also important to talk about it. To talk about in general terms, talk about in specific terms, ensure there's support, ensure there is education around it, saying these are the possibilities, this is what you might consider, be it journaling, prayer, meditation, exercise, medication, psychiatry, counseling. There's all those options. I think that has to be available for everybody. But I think that trust and listening is critical to know the person.
Loma, have you ever experienced a dramatic change in a patient after you've had a conversation and named something you've identified?
Yes. And I guess it was because I underestimated the trust that we had developed. I'm not a clinician, please understand that. But it's a difficult world, and you sort of talk and you develop, and I took this opportunity where I thought with this gentleman we had sort of a good rapport going, and I had to address a behavior. And whether it's part of his mental health or not, I took the leap. And then the next day I saw him coming down from the elevator, and he's got this frown on, and he said, and I knew that I had triggered something. So my job at that point was to continue to build a relationship and to bring the team together, because we don't work with any of our residents without a full perspective. It's not just clinical, it's also those people that clean the room. They know those residents often better than anybody else. So I bring the people together, we talk about it, we bring significant people in their lives, and you try to work it through.
that ties back to the idea of community.
Yeah.
Yes, that we were mentioning at the
Yeah.
beginning.
If I could say a few words, one of my, actually my CEO from Mindhorn Institute, Dr. Brian Lynch, was visiting with some native groups on the north shore of Lake Huron. And they were saying, well, we need some help in our community. You know, we need some people coming into it. And he says, you have everybody else, you have everybody you need there already. You don't have to be a clinician, you don't have to be lettered, you don't have to be skilled. You just have to network and start to listen to each other and chip away a little bit at a time. And as you said, teamwork of all the people, the support staff even in the room know the people better than everyone else but Mike. I thought it was kind of an understatement that you had success, and I'm not a clinician, and it's like, you did wonderfully. It's just, I like to see that.
Seems like we're doing very well. We might actually have time for audience questions, which is exciting. So I'd like to offer, we're going to put as a base 10 minutes for a conversation for our 4 participants here, our 4 panelists to debate. The last question, what can we do to help around mental health? And so I'll let you converse around this and exchange ideas and points. We're going to set 10 minutes and see where that goes.
I think we have to work as a community, and every size of community, you know, it spreads out from little to big. We have to try to reduce that stigma. I mean, as an employer, I'm very aware that I have staff that have mental health issues, and they're afraid of sharing it because I might lose my job. That's one thing, the stigma in every area.
It's huge. It could be like the reason why people don't access services at all. Again, back to that point, you might feel ashamed, or what are people going to think, or that judgment piece, or even that unknown piece is, well, if I reach out, what does that even look like? And what is that service going to be, or what are the services that could support me? I think is something often I come across in my role, but I really do want to circle back to that community piece, because communities and yourselves are the experts in your own lives. I think sometimes it gets framed as, you know, everyone with all the letters after the name are going to tell you how to get better, and we have the silver bullet, so to speak, on how to get better, and that's not necessarily the case. It's more, how do we pose questions and work together to help someone get to another place? And I don't think that has to be necessarily a clinician. You can do that with your friends. And you already do it in multiple ways. You talk to each other when you're down, or if something's going on, you're already having that connection and that conversation. And so I think that's really like a huge resource piece. And how do you talk about it? You're already talking about a lot of these pieces. It's just adding that additional label of these things feed into mental health.
One of the things that we've seen success in doing, especially in the Hearing Voices movement and on university campuses, are just simple discussion groups that are opening up of space where people can share their experiences, share what they're going through, not necessarily falling into diagnostic language, but of course everyone has that experience. So I just want to say, if you want to label it, label it. If that makes you feel comfortable, use it. If it doesn't make you feel comfortable, don't use it. But talk and have this kind of discussion group where it's an open space, it's a space that feels safe, maybe a facilitator of some sort, to just say, okay, now what do you guys think about this? But in that way, opening up a space of conversation, I think, is very important.
Yeah, that safe conversation would also provide an opportunity, because often I find people with mental illness are really ashamed. That shame piece goes with it. So if you hear other people talking about it, you think, you know, maybe it's not so bad. Maybe I can talk to somebody.
Exactly. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I'm aware that we're in our church here at St. Barnabas, and that there's a faith element and creator element that polarizes my life. I'm very fortunate to have had that influence, and the idea that my own parents were kind of lacking in their skills, and I was resentful toward them for a long time. 20, 30 years is a long time, 40 years is a long time. But from the moment that I realized that our Creator was a perfect father and mother, I realized, well, that's okay. My parents can be imperfect because I have a perfect father and mother, right? And I try to remember on a good day, I remember to tell myself, thank you for this wonderful morning, Lord, and may I do one thing according to your will. That's on a good day, I remember to do that, and one small thing. And if I do one small thing, then that's great. If I forget, well, I screw up. And I think it's important for us to realize that most people, most of the time, are doing the best they can, even though they're doing a really crappy job. They're actually doing the best they can. And so it's so easy to criticize. And criticism only ends up ruining people's sense of themselves or an image of themselves. So there's no such thing as constructive criticism, actually. There's like, I really like the way you did this. I really like the way you did that. You have to find something. And managing clients in my office, patients, that's part of our training is you've got to find something important about that person. Not, oh, you know, you're crooked here, you're crooked there, and that doesn't work. And I did that for a few years and realized somebody said, I feel like I'm a wreck. Oh, I'm sorry. And it took me a long time to get past that and realize, you know, this works well, that works well, that works well, and now this here could use a little bit of some thought. So it's a difference in perspective, and realizing that we start off with that connection with our Creator, and that makes us all we all have an opportunity to make the day go well. Even if it's a kind of a lousy day, if you did one little thing according to as well, then it's a decent day.
When we talk about mental health, I also think it's important, you know, if one of your friends is depressed, or you know someone that's depressed, and it's very common, you know, oh, just pull up your socks, just get over it, keep going on. So it is important to realize when it is no longer, that person is no longer coping, and maybe help them find some help. And there could be resistance, and there could come a time when there's nothing you can do anymore. That person has to be agreeable, and maybe they will be at some point in their life, or at some point in their journey in their health.
That takes a lot of commitment, because then suddenly it's like you're responsible, taking some responsibility for that person to be with them for a while until they can get
It is
connected.
a commitment. But mental health, it's much
That's
easier to
scary.
have a broken arm, because you've got a cast, you've got 6 to 8 weeks of healing time. Depression, often you have to go through years of trying different meds or different methods, and
One of the best things for depression actually is walking. Being outside in the external environment floods our brain with all kinds
those
of
are all
information.
healthy, absolutely.
Yeah, and part of depression comes from the brain shutting down. And so the more we actually give to our eyes in terms of environment and people around us, the more we refeed the core that kind of makes us tick.
I have heard about counselors that do walking counseling. They don't sit and counsel, you know, let's go for a walking counsel, which is ideal. You know, ideally in nature, because a little dose of nature is like adding a little bit of spirituality.
And the other piece of that too is you don't have to look each other in the eye, so it's
Yes.
less intense.
Yes.
How many walks have you gone on talking, or your partner or parent, and hey, by the way, I was thinking. I don't have to look at you as I'm saying, so that piece is helpful. But I want to circle back to the piece you mentioned as well, is I think holding that of like everyone's doing the best they can with like the skills and knowledge that they have is like a great outlook for both ourselves and also for others, and thinking about mental health as well. Because no one's actively out there trying to be depressed or anxious or all these different pieces. But I'd also like note of how do we be like kind to ourselves, because I think often, speaking of that criticalness, we're often very critical of ourselves. Oh, like why am I down? Like, oh, I feel this, or really negative in our thinking, which reinforces a lot of how we're feeling. And so I would put to the group is how you talk to yourself. Pretend you're talking to like a small baby or a 2-year-old. Would you say these things that you're saying to yourself to a small child? And if not, how do we start talking to ourselves better? Because that also will improve our mental health and how we're feeling if it's only negative thoughts going on in our head.
I totally agree with that.
Yeah.
Totally.
Yeah.
And be kind to others.
Exactly.
I had a suit, a legal suit, about 10 years ago, and going into the suit, I received an email in the morning that said, be polite with your enemies. Be polite with your enemies. I went in, and the other lawyer's son had come to work with him by mistake, and he asked for some time to accommodate him. No problem. And by the end of the day, we had the highest settlement. I was in great shape, just because I was being polite all day long. And when we're polite to our enemies, we're polite to ourselves, because we hear all that inside. Our self-talk inside is powerful. And if we want to get change, it's one of the places we can work is with the self-talk. What do we say to ourselves? How do we address ourselves? Like I have all these issues here, and I'm a bad father, and I'm a deadbeat dad, and my household's broken up, and I'm divorced, and I got some, I gotta go to court. Then you say, well, I have been a bad father, and I have been a deadbeat dad, and I still have to go to court. But now that I've been thinking about changing, I'm doing things differently. So I'm already taking action, and that's in the past. As soon as you say it's in whatever you are, is the way that you are, then you kind of invest that that's the way it's going to be. But once you say it's in the past, it's like part of your brain believes it was in the past. I used to have problems with remembering people's names, but now I'm taking note differently, and I'm doing a great job. So little things like that, I call it a mental trick if you wish, but it's actually a change of attitude towards yourself, where the past is the past, and you try to put yourself to live in the present, only in the present. Not too much in the future, because we can get pretty excited about what's coming up. Oh my gosh, my mortgage payment's due, and my taxes, and I don't have money. It's just today is today, and let's enjoy today.
To touch on that, I mean, this idea of positive reinforcement, being polite with oneself, but also with others, and especially in these types of conversations that we want to have, not with just ourselves. People who we know are having a hard time, or with their enemies, whatever. Time is a huge issue, because something's not just going to happen overnight.
Absolutely.
Someone can host a discussion group for months on end, and a person can be sitting there in the corner quiet until finally someone says something one night, and they come out and they say, you know what, this has been bothering me for the past 5 years. And I think that patience is extremely key in talking about these kinds of experiences. And yeah, I think that's just something to keep in mind.
Change takes time.
Yeah.
It starts with us, though. Okay? Once we make a decision, like each of you, for example, today that decided to come here, chose to come here, and you're already changing your life by doing this. Once they make and that's actually what happens in my practice, that when people arrive to my practice very often, they're already better than they were when they phoned in. It's like, that's because once you decided to call, things change inside you. You're the one making the difference.
Well, that community is incredibly important. So people have to find areas that they can find joy in. To be aware individually of what gives you joy is critical. And also finding perhaps an area of passion, be it art, be it poetry.
That's the glue that keeps our body together, that makes everything stick.
And sometimes that's the job of a friend or a family member to help remind them. Or let's go to this art exhibit and hopefully trigger something. There are lots of little tools that we can all use.
And I think a piece of that too is you could be a good friend and reach out and do all these pieces. I think sometimes with certain folks, even just sitting and being with someone is enough. You don't have to say words or have to have the perfect script written of what to say. Just being not alone is so powerful.
If you could maybe make use of the microphone, maybe you.
Oh, you're not hearing us, the last.
Excuse me, when you're doing.
We had some great ideas up here.
Just so you know, there was a really good discussion up here.
That's a great
I don't even hear it.
But we like to hear it at the back too.
All right.
Just lean in a little bit.
Can't hear. So if you could.
There's a question, I think.
I'd like actually to touch upon a couple of things that were said. Ben, your academic career is with the arts and comparative literature. Do you think the arts have a role to play in mental health in the conversation?
I think they really do. If you look at any writer, they often talk about these very intense experiences. Look at Joseph Conrad. He had conversations with his characters out loud in his mother tongue in Polish. Virginia Woolf, also very intense experiences and talked about hearing voices, for example. Same with Ray Bradbury. Faulkner, for example, as well. So if we read and we engage in the arts, I think you will find a lot of similar experiences or experiences we can relate to, no matter how different they are from our own lives. Practicing it as well, I think, is very cathartic. People feel great joy when they create something. And it's not only just in that sense of creation and, oh, I wrote something or I painted something, but it's also, I'll tie it back to the community, creating something together with other people. I think that's extremely important. Having a project like putting together a newspaper or a journal or a collective art piece or something like that, I think that's something that ties people together as well as just on an individual level makes you feel like you've done something and you've put yourself into a piece of work.
If I can as well, like for me, I used to do a lot of like trauma processing with children and youth that experienced abuse, and often I would use art in processing that experience because one, I mean, just on a basic level, if you're ever coloring with kids and drawing, it's actually quite calming because you're just kind of, I don't know, I find it very calming and it takes your mind off it, and it's a beautiful piece when you're done. But it was also a way to help externalize pieces that are inside. So for example, we'd use clay to develop the person that maybe did something to them. Or what is anger? Can you make that out of clay? What does that look like? What colors are used? And then so maybe they'd have a ball and it's spiky. And where is that spiky when you talk about your anger? So it's a way to also, again, talk about feelings or emotions or experiences, but it's here, not so much like, it makes it easier to talk about because it's external to you versus your own feelings. Because sometimes that's very vulnerable to say, I'm feeling angry, or this is what anger looks like to me. Well, it's okay, just create this. What do you think anger for out here looks like? You know, addiction out here.
And so Matthew, you're talking about your practice. I'm wondering if there are resources that you notice are constantly underused when you're dealing with mental health.
Well, it's interesting. I guess it's twofold. For me, like right now in the city, because of funding and a whole bunch of pieces, I would say that the wait lists are extremely long to access mental health services, which is really not great when someone finally makes the decision, okay, I need help, and then there's a 3, 6, 12-month wait list. Not too great. But I would say there's a lot of resources. So for example, like the table over here today, there's a bunch of walk-in clinics, even in this area, just at Wood Green, at Pape and Danforth. There's Broadview Psychology that's at the street, that you can just walk into and say, hi, is there someone I can chat to at certain hours? And you just walk in and have a conversation. So I think those sorts of pieces are underutilized in the city. What I would also say is there's like a number of things you can also do at home for yourself. So there's a number of like apps that have come out for anxiety, like there's the Calm app or Headspace that can teach you like breathing or kind of like anti-anxiety tricks and tips, which sometimes people will use and you're at home. And there's also like a number of like hotlines or resource lines in the city that people may or may not be aware of. Again, stigma might come in of, should I call this line or not? But even there, on the table, we have like the Toronto Seniors Helpline, which will connect you to services or just be a friendly voice if you need someone to talk to. The Kids Help Phone. There's a number of even like city services like 311, Connects Ontario if you call and say, this is who I am, this is my age, this is where I live, and this is what I'm looking for. They'll connect you to the closest agency that's available to you, which a lot of people often don't know about either.
Thank you. I'd like to...
Yeah,
oh, absolutely. Go ahead.
I just want to thank you, Matt, for making it clear that there are a lot of services available, that it's a matter of reaching out and making a connection. And I also wanted to suggest that, oh yeah, thanks, I'm not sure if you can hear that. I also want to suggest that, again, we're in a church here, that one of the first services we have is prayer. And that I found in my practice time that lots of people do very well with prayer, since something seems to change. And if you make an affirmation, you say, I'm going to do this, I'm going to make sure that my daughter's school is safe for her to go to school there, that she's not going to get bullied. Next thing, I'm joining the safety committee. Next thing, I'm organizing parents to volunteer to do supervision in the schoolyard. Next thing, there's a community that's grown, and only because I decided to make the change and because I actually prayed about it. And I said, you know, this is what I'd like to see in my life. So that's kind of living your prayer. So prayer is always an option. If you want something, you've got to say, that's what I want. And that's what prayer, in a sense, does. And we change as we do that.
Thank you.
Someone's
And
got
so
an arm up there.
I'd like to offer the floor to the audience for about 10 minutes of questions.
So much of the panel today has discussed mental health as it manifests over a long period of time and turns into a problem, and the concept of short-term access to therapy. What do we do about the long game that is beyond a referral that is holistic and consistent and maybe as an extension of that other question, how do we stop people from falling through the cracks? What do we do for the long game?
So essentially, how do we prevent people from falling through the cracks? How do we make sure that we go beyond a referral and a few months of treatment? Is that what's the long-term, if not solution, but care practice that we can think of?
I mean, I can speak to that if you want. So for me, I think it's just that. I think there is a lot of short-term services of like the walk-in one-time clinics. And I think there needs to be investment into longer-term services for folks because, 3 sessions might be helpful for one person, maybe on the front end has a couple things. But we know when you go through multiple layers of trauma and oppression and poverty and all these different pieces, that kind of layers onto what your experience is. And that takes time to process, that you can't process that in a 1-hour session. It takes time to develop that trust. So like in my previous work, we didn't have like a session limit. It was, let's work until you feel like you're in a good place. And I think there needs to be more of that. And there needs to be more kind of wraparound holistic supports as you're mentioning. So again, previous to my role right now, part of my role is developing those wraparound services and programs that actually address every facet of someone's life. The issue with that is it serves a smaller amount of people and is very cost intensive, which I would argue is what needs to be done. However, on a dollars, numbers, and cents game, you've served 20 people when we could have had 2,000 in the door. And I think that's always what's in balance in our system. But I'm right there with you saying that we absolutely need more long-term supports that are effectively address everything that people are looking to address. Does that answer partly?
The last thought.
Yeah.
Is it's largely bureaucrats, not in a derogatory sense, but in the fact that they work in massive institutions and organizations that flow into one another as a giant circle. So many of the practices that are developed in these policies are gatekeeping. Because at some point you have to gatekeep in order to serve the people in general who are able to get it. How do we make policy created by statutes, acts of parliament, and make that relevant in a human experience? Because when you do send people away, what happens to them? How do we make policy work for real humans and real life?
Great question. I feel like that's the ultimate question, really. How do we do this? And maybe I'll answer it in 2 parts. But I am always of the believer of, again, that like intention piece of like we're always trying the best we can with the skills and knowledge we have for today. And that sometimes it might work for right now, but in a year it doesn't work. And how are we revisiting that and failing forward, so to speak, where we can use that as learnings to impact and change our policy so that actually it addresses that human issue. And I guess the other piece of that, on just like a shared note, is right now the City of Toronto is looking to put together a well-being plan for the city and asking that question specifically of how do we actually support folks that are falling through the gaps or like holistically support people in the city for their well-being. How do we do that? And I think so that question is very topical and present at City Hall. And it's not just us, I guess I'll use it because City of Toronto had on, talking about it at City Hall, but actually going into community to say, what does this look like? This is what we're thinking. Does that work? No. How do we change that? Because we recognize that citizens and community and individuals need to inform that, not just be developed in towers. So it's coming. We're always trying.
Sorry, in the front, you have a question?
Yeah. I'm a high school principal, and recently we had a PA day at my school, and I invited a speaker from CAMH to talk to my teachers about mental health. And the speaker said, the first thing I want to tell you is that mental health and mental illness are not the same thing. Many people think they are, and I did too. I thought that mental health was just the absence of mental illness, and he said, no, that's wrong. He said you can be mentally healthy and still have a mental illness. And you can be mentally unhealthy and be free of mental illness. He said they're distinct and separate. I haven't heard that from the panel today. What is your opinion on that? He was from CAMH and deals with this all the time.
Well, I'd like to respond quickly on that. And that we started off with the idea there's a continuum. Oh yeah, I wanted to say that we started off with the idea there's a continuum of mental health and that, or mental awareness, or mental capacity, or emotional capacity, or ability to be social, to be part of a community. That we actually strove to get away from definitions, to get away from delineations, or from boundaries, or from demarcations of you're healthy or not healthy. And by the way, you're not healthy.
But I'm awake.
That's better now. So I hope that answers your question. That the idea is that our evaluation of our health has to do with a person's survivability in their environment, and if we can be with them, and that in some way improves their ability to survive in their environment, then something good has happened for them. That's the way I would see it. And never mind labels, schizophrenic, and bipolar, and whatever, right? There's all kinds of challenges we have.
Sorry, I think mental health is not, it's not synonymous with absence of illness. I mean, mental health, but as we said, it's that's sort of a very fluid line, and there are ways of having mental health that we've talked about many ways that, you're right, maybe it's not just, I'm not depressed, therefore I am mentally healthy. I think there's some truth into what that person said, I think.
Yeah, it's that matrix, right? Where like I could be diagnosed with PTSD or a mood disorder or anxiety, but I'm seeing counseling and I have a good support network and everything else, and I could be mentally great. I have this label attached to me that says I should be ill, but I'm doing okay. And so I think for me, and like I think we were speaking about earlier about that, in order to gain, for mental health to gain, be accepted, I think when it first came out in the medical community, we had to use language that was very medical. You're ill, you're not ill, you're well, you're not well. The same way you have cancer, you don't have cancer. And so that's why a lot of that language is used. For myself, I kind of see it as like, again, that continuum and fluidity piece of everything that we've been through in our life has created where we are right now. Might be good, might not be good, and how does that change? Because for some people, having a diagnosis can be empowering of like, I understand now what's going on for me. For others, that's also a sentence of, oh, okay, I have depression, I have that for the rest of my life, and I'm never going to get better. And so I think that's what we weigh, and depending on the person, how people will frame it to them, because I think you can get better and you can heal. The time piece will be different for each person, but there is truth to that.
We have time for one more question.
I was diagnosed with ADD. I won't put the H in because I'm not hyper, well, except for a little fidgeting, I'm not terribly hyper. It's my mind that's hyper. I think a lot. It took, my diagnosis was at 56 years old. I'm 67 now. And I still have not found a doctor that's paid by OHIP to discuss this. Why are there not specialists out there? I've read a lot on the internet. I've tried to help myself. I'm taking a very low dose of medication, and about 4 times the usual starting dose, and I find it's helpful. I'm thinking about upping the dose, but I have to live with it. It has side effects. What? The question is, why is there no help for adults that is paid by OHIP?
Yeah, that's that policy piece.
Yeah,
isn't
it
That's-
goes, and I know there are some, not many, but some psychologists, not psychiatrists, but psychologists that if you go through your family doctor and ask for a referral, you can get an OHIP paid psychologist. However, again, it goes back to that wait list piece, which is unfortunate. Also, depending on your age and whereabouts you live, there might also be nonprofits in your area that have free services that can actually discuss and help with those pieces. That would do like case management or counseling or these sorts of things to actually help process what does this diagnosis mean or how is this showing up for me in my life, to help kind of process it, because that's
But I think we all agree there's certainly not enough OHIP
agreed.
paid assistance.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%.
Thank you. Thank you for the questions, and I would like to remind you that if you have any further thought, point, or question that you'd like to share, the Post-it notes are available to you with pens on the table, and it's more than an invitation. I mean, it's really there for you and for us also to inform our next forum and have the thoughts circulate. I'd like to thank our 4 panelists who've taken time and energy to be with us today here on a Sunday. So thank you very much for that. And I would like to give the floor to Dr. Reverend Anita Gaide, whom I'd also like to thank for organizing this forum, putting all of us together here.
Well, thank you. On behalf of Reverend Jeanette Lewis and myself, representing Anglicans and Lutherans, working really well together. I guess we're an example of that. I'd like to thank the panel very much for their very informative, for their very open discussion, and I want to say that it takes a lot of courage to be here. I want to thank you for being here and for being honest and open, and I want to thank every single one of you for being here. I know that there are other people who would probably want to be here, and I know that, and they're not. So to walk through these doors and to actually talk about this, and this is what we wanted to do, let's begin the discussion, and we are beginning the discussion. Dr. Peter, you mentioned this is a church, this is a public forum also. This is how we're seeing it. So in no order, Dr. Peter Guyversells, Ben Dawes, Lama Stickwitz, Matthew Dewar, Dr. Elise Bale, and Caspar Zdrenis. We thank all of you, and great to see all these young people here, isn't it? So maybe we give them another we thank Bill Strain, and this will be on the website, is that correct? And Helen, thank you so much. I was worried about the coffee. And home baking and everything, so that's there. And see, I know I've got to hand this out. I hope I have thanked everybody. Can't read my own writing. There is a sign-up sheet over here, and at the back. And I think the idea was we want to continue the discussion. We're going to have another forum. So if you would like to, how do you design this, Jeanette? Just, if you have a particular subject you'd like to have focused on the next time, this was very broad. If you wanted to write the subject, we're also concerned that Sunday afternoon and lunchtime maybe isn't the best time. If there's 3 options of different times there, and if they all work, tick them all. Or if they don't, just tick the ones that do. So we can do the next one sometime. I think in March we're looking at doing it. So. And Reverend Grace Caldwell, who is an addictions counselor and specialist, and who has kind of consented to be with us here if we have questions. So Grace, maybe has everybody met you, or will meet you? There is coffee, so please feel free to stay and to mingle, and you will stay also. So thank you for that. Also ask you when you leave, if you would go through the doors that are at the back there by the coat rack and outside, because there will be a Lutheran service happening in the church shortly. That's right, thanks very much. And so there are lots of resources here.
from community organizations. You're welcome to browse on this table and on that table, and at least you've got post-it notes. The next, that's enough you're saying, January 26th, Music for the Soul. We believe that soul is a great form of, music is a great form of therapy. We invite you for that. So, again, and then, that's it. You want me to get these? Paper.
Oh my goodness.
So, at least this is for you. Thank you. All these books refer to some sort of therapy.
Very nice.
I think this is Matthew, this is for you. Yeah, everybody has
Thank you.
Yeah. This is for Chris Carson.